And we are going to start this evening with a Pledge of Allegiance. If I could get everybody to stand, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, a few housekeeping things before we get started. We're just trying to gauge how you guys all heard about us. So if I could get a show of hands who found out about this event through the paper. Okay, through flyers that were passed out and on Facebook. Excellent, we got a pretty well-rounded. Excellent, thank you for that. I am going to introduce our moderator. This is Sophia Sherman. She's been a resident of Elk Grove for more than 40 years. She has been a leader in our community. When she was a council member, she helped shape Elk Grove's transformation into cityhood and was active in helping improve the city. When Elk Grove incorporated in 2000, Sophia became the first woman mayor of the incorporated city of Elk Grove. She has served in numerous council and advisory board positions for a variety of city and nonprofit organizations. Mrs. Sherman continues to volunteer her time and energy to the community today, and we're glad to have her today to moderate our panel. Sophia.
Okay, before I get started, how about if you all turn your cell phones on vibrate or something? Or put them out in the car or in the lobby? That would be really appreciated by the panelists and speakers that are going to be asking for, questions. The second thing is, I'm involved in a lot of things, but I couldn't say no. And one of these days I'm going to learn how to say no, I think. But when Laura called, there was just no way that I could say no to her. So thank you so very much for inviting me this evening. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce the panel, then I'm going to go and explain to you the format of the forum this evening. And we will get out of here. We need to be out here at 9 o'clock, if not sooner. So, but I don't want to rush anybody with their questions, please, because we're asking for questions. So people will understand what this program is all about. So if I may introduce our members of the panel. Bill Evers, he's stuck in traffic, so we're not sure if he's going to be able to make it on time. And then we have Dr. Stephen Ladd. And then we have Miss Alice Mercer. Then Maggie Ellis. And Angela Weinzinger. And then Mark Cerruti. Did I pronounce that right, sir?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the format is going to go as follows. The opening statements, we're going to allow 30 minutes, which means each panelist will have 5 minutes. And then we're going to go into 25 minutes of roundtable discussion, and that's where the panelists will each have 2 minutes to speak to one of the concerns given to them previously or to something said by another panelist. So we can, interact. We want to mix it up a little bit. Other panelists will then have an additional 1 minute to respond if you so wish to do so. And then for 35 minutes, we're going to ask, questions from the audience. And individuals from the audience have a maximum of 1 minute each to ask their questions. And then may I insert a little personal note here. We love to hear from you. We love to hear your questions, but please be brief so that we can have many more people participate. That would be great, because sometimes people, I know you get a little bit passionate and you go a little bit longer, and it kind of takes away from others having the opportunity to ask their questions. Let's see, the panelists will have the 2 minutes for responses, and other panelists can add to answer, and you'll have each 1 minute. And then our closing statements will be a total of 12 minutes, which allows, if Bill Evers is here, otherwise we'll stretch it out a little bit. Closing statements will be 2 minutes per panelist. So we will now begin with our opening statements. And if I'm, okay, we'll go to Dr. Stephen Ladd, please.
Thank you, Sophia, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Before I start with my comments, I would like to say that in accepting Ms. Bassett's invitation to be here this evening, I took it upon myself to invite some of my colleagues that are not sitting here at the panel, because as it was related to me, why we're gathering is so that people that have questions about Common Core would get an understanding from us relative to, is that better? No? Yes, no? Okay. That people would have questions, and rather than talk about things in more ethereal or vague ways, I asked Lorraine Blomquist, who is our curriculum specialist for language arts, to be with us. I asked Mark Freethy, our curriculum specialist in mathematics, to be here, because in a lot of the conversations surrounding the Common Core, there's a great deal of use of language in which people will decry things and use language and use statements like curriculum synonymous with standards, and frameworks as synonymous with standards. And they're not synonyms. And what happens is the conversation then gets waylaid because it really requires different answers if we're going to be very exact with our language. So I have them here with us this evening, and at the appropriate times I am going to invite them to help us so that we as a community have an understanding and answering our questions about Common Core. So with that said, Elk Grove Unified School District has had a long history of being committed to ensuring that the students in our school district are prepared to go on after they finish high school to be productive citizens in our state, our country, and now in the global economy. We have been involved with, for a number of years, the implementation of both standards-based curriculum and standards through the California content standards, the what we want kids to know and be able to do. And our mission has not changed. We are absolutely committed through the fine work of the educators in the Elk Grove Unified School District to preparing our young people to be successful in the 21st century economy. But times change, things change, and so moving from one set of standards to a new set of standards, in my opinion, is not frightening. It doesn't hold us back, but in fact I believe it will empower us and enfranchise our great educators and our community and our support of each other to prepare our young people for that 21st century challenge. So as we go forward, it's not shifting from nothing to something, but rather going from a set of standards to a new set of standards. And standards by themselves are not going to be the decisive factor of what takes place. It is the absolute wonderful work that takes place in our classrooms by great teachers prepared to help all of our students be prepared for the 21st century that's going to make the difference. Linda Darling Hammond, in an article, in fact, said something very similar. She says that the standards aren't the salvation, nor are they the Armageddon. One of the things that I hope comes out of this evening is that we recognize that there is a politicization of the Common Core. People want to discuss it relative to the implications of federal government, national government, coming into states' rights, national curriculum. Well, the Common Core isn't a national curriculum, but it's been described as such. So as we go forward this evening, I personally am going to focus my comments and try to engage the conversation around education. I'll leave the politics to politicians, and I'll work with the folks in our district to prepare our young people to be successful in the 21st century with great education, and the Common Core will be the next iteration. And as we unbundle it, we're going to focus on strong instruction. The Common Core has great rigor, and we'll continue to do the great things in preparing our kids as we go forward, and I look forward to this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ladd. Next panelist, Alice Mercer, please.
Hello, my name is Alice Mercer, and I'm a teacher over in Sacramento City Unified School District. I teach in the 6th grade. I would list myself as a critic rather than an ardent foe of the Common Core. I've been looking at them for the past few years, doing some thinking about them, trying to implement some of them over in my classroom, and I've done a bit of blogging about it, and that's probably how I ended up over here. Part of it I will go over and admit is that when Laura asked me to come here, she said it was very difficult to find teachers who would go over and speak against the Common Core. I think that's because we're pretty much used to working with what we're handed with. We do, I think, an amazing job with it. And certainly the teachers over in your district have a very good reputation for what they do. My concerns about the standards are specific, and they may or may not make the standards impossible, but they are problematic. And my feeling is this is part of a long line of standards and testing-based accountability. We already have overly ambitious standards in this state. We've already been focused over on testing. I think this is problematic, and I'm concerned about this continuing trend.
Oh, thank you. Next one will be, let's see where we're going to go here, 3, 4. How about Maggie Ellis?
I'm glad to see such a nice turnout tonight. I am Maggie Ellis. I teach 5th grade in Elk Grove. I have taught in this district since 1994. Looking at our current, not our current standards, but the standards before the Common Core, those came out in '97. That's 15 years ago. And I remember 3 years after being a brand new teacher getting those standards and feeling overwhelmed. And then getting a new adoption and feeling overwhelmed. And then getting another new adoption and feeling overwhelmed. That sense of change and suddenly having new things to have to learn and deliver at the best possible instruction to our students, it's part of being a teacher. There's constant change. So as Common Core came into the state, it was another change. Granted, because of the state budget, we haven't had a lot of change as teachers for 10 years. Our math books were 10 years old. It was time to get rid of them. Our secretaries who were trying to find math books to replace for students who lost them were going on eBay because we couldn't get them from publishers. So as a teacher, I'm glad that we're ready for some change and we're ready for some new curriculum. Now, as Dr. Ladd said, there's a lot of discussion about standards, about testing, about curriculum. And those are three very, very different conversations. I think most teachers, especially those teachers who've been at title schools and very much had the scrutiny of test scores upon them, feeling that their instruction is very tied to a score, are looking now and saying, oh, I can breathe a little bit, I can teach like I need to teach, not teach to a specific test. So there's that discussion. We have the standards. Yes, we're going to have to figure out what's going on, but if we look at the standards, the majority of the 97 standards are within the Common Core standards. They just look different. And then we have curriculum. And within our district, we are actively looking at publishers who say they have Common Core curriculum. Doesn't mean we're going to adopt it. We're going to scrutinize it. We're going to look at it to see if it's really worth investing in for however a period of time is going to be. The adoption cycle is very unknown at this point. But that's what we do as teachers on a regular basis. It doesn't change my teaching in the classroom. I am still going to have my students with the rigor, the challenges of problem solving, applying themselves. There's been conversation about it being less rigorous. I guarantee, as I'm teaching, many of your parents in here, you don't like Go Math because it's different. And teachers, when we first started, I have a fellow teacher in here, we had debates the first 2 months of school. I loved it, she hated it. But as we're getting into it, I can see the value. As I'm talking to kindergarten teachers, they see the value and the amazing knowledge about numbers and process and computation and problem solving that's coming from the way that we are addressing math. It's not something that we're scared of. It's sometimes we're overwhelmed with and we might be frustrated with because we're trying to find resources. But it's an exciting time to be a teacher. It's a very exciting time. So I welcome your questions, and just know that everything that we do as teachers in this district, we do it to the highest quality we possibly can, working in collaboration with our district. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Angela Weinzinger.
Good evening. Thank you so much, first of all, for all of you coming out on a kind of a chilly evening and being here. I know you have a lot of other things you could be doing, and I appreciate all the panelists as well for being here tonight. I am a mom, first of all, and of 3 wonderful kids. I have 2 high schoolers and a 6th grader, and I am the school board president in the Travis Unified School District, down the road a little ways. And as it says in my bio, I decided to run for the school board because I felt like parental rights were being eroded in our schools. And so I got involved and amazingly enough, through help of a lot of friends, was able to get elected to my board. It's been a huge learning experience for me. And right after the first year of my being on the board is when I started learning about Common Core. As a board member, you would think if Common Core was being implemented or at least adopted about 3 years ago now, you would think that 2 years ago I would have been hearing about Common Core as a school board member. Nothing. Except for maybe little bits and pieces of it here and there, but it was not called Common Core. It was not explained what it was. And when I found out about it from an outside source, not from my district officials, which, by the way, I could tell you, I love my superintendent. I think she's fabulous, and we have a great staff in our district. But I was just kind of baffled that I didn't hear anything about it, and all of a sudden I was going to start being required to make decisions about Common Core without knowing anything about it. And I can tell you right now that I have spoken to several of our state legislators, and they don't know anything about it, and yet they are being asked to vote on issues requiring the spending of money to implement Common Core in this state. And so I have some huge concerns in regards to those issues, not only as a school board president, and I can make it political because technically I am a politician, even though I hate to call myself that, because really I'm more of a concerned mother. But I get very concerned when we have something that's this important that deals with our children that has been kind of handed to us in a very sly, quiet manner, and those who are going to make the decisions about this didn't even get to know about it before it was decided upon. And so I have huge, huge issues with that. And I can tell you right now, I am not against standards. We need to have standards. We need to know what our teachers need to be teaching our children. I do have a problem with standards that are expected to be for every student across the board in every single state. And I have huge concerns about that because I know in my district, and we have a fairly small district, ours is only a little over 5,000 students, that from school to school, there's a different culture at each school based on the kids that are there, the families that are there. And even within those schools, there's a little bit of a culture difference. How in the world do we think we can teach children the same standards across the United States when our states are so different? And in reality, it is not given to the federal government to make that determination that we need to have education standards across the United States. That's a state right. And I am a politician, so I get to make those kind of statements. And so that's my main concern, is we need to keep our local agencies informed in what's going on, and our local people, parents, teachers, and school board members and districts should be able to make the decisions on these things when it comes to standards and how we're going to educate our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cerruti?
Thank you. The examination of learning standards, curriculum, and instruction isn't new. There have been numerous changes throughout educational history, whether it was a new teacher in the one-room schoolhouse or added subjects or textbook adoptions. All of these changes included significantly divergent opinions and oftentimes public debate. And these educational shifts are to be expected as information changes and our knowledge of teaching and learning expands. There, in fact, should be modifications made to learning expectations, curriculum, instructional practice, and assessment of learning. Approximately 20 years ago, when the development of content standards began, as they were being developed across states and across the country, groups of educators would come together to reach consensus on specifically what students should know and be able to do in each subject area and across grade levels. And this was no easy task, and there was routinely considerable debate among educators and the public. Despite the fact that real-world application of knowledge and skill is done within integrated systems and highly complex human networks, the standards were actually developed in relative isolation of one another. They were characteristically dense, with many individual topics to be covered and oftentimes insufficient time for teachers to cover them within a given school year. This coverage of topics versus teaching for deep understanding was a characteristic of these standards-based instructional times. This was heavily reinforced by the externally developed and mandated assessments associated with it. And these assessments whittled learning down to selected response items on standardized tests that included multiple choice and true and false questions, not an optimal measure of authentic student learning. And we can no longer look at education as a myriad of independent subjects, topics, lessons, and assessments, but rather we must look at it as an integrated teaching and learning system. And this brings us to the Common Core. The Common Core supports increased academic rigor and expands the notion of learning to be better aligned with college and career readiness. And the Common Core also affords us greater opportunity to better prepare our students to be productive employers, employees, and responsible global citizens. Dr. Ladd earlier referenced Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, and I would do also, a Standard professor and researcher and prominent American educator and author. She has what I believe is perhaps the most accurate, or one of the most accurate, definitions of the role of education in schools today. She notes that our job in schools is to prepare students for jobs that do not yet exist, creating ideas and solutions for problems and for products and problems that have not yet been identified, and using technologies that have not yet been invented. The 15-year-old California content standards, while rigorous, simply can't meet the learning demands of today's colleges, workplace, or citizenry, and our past assessments must be replaced with adaptive, performance-based assessments that provide interactive opportunities for students to demonstrate their learning in multiple ways. I would hope that no one is surprised by the fact that we're undergoing a natural evolution to our educational practices. It's our responsibility as professional educators to do so. There are hypersonic-paced changes in technology that are bringing about advancements in information availability and global communicative possibilities. And this, coupled with neuroscience advancements that have brought about keen insight into brain functioning as it relates to teaching and learning, creates an absolute necessity for us to adapt learning standards, curriculum, instruction, and our assessment practices. And I'd like to leave, or at least finish this portion, with just a few what I consider to be Common Core certainties. The Common Core state standards provide an opportunity for advanced rigor. The Common Core state standards support improved alignment to college and career readiness and better prepare our students for lifelong learning. As Dr. Ladd noted, the Common Core state standards cannot be looked at in isolation. They alone will have no positive impact. And this is why we are focusing on the interaction of the diverse learning needs of our kids, coupled with curriculum delivered via high-quality instruction and assessed using adaptive and authentic assessment strategies. Characteristics of high-quality instruction will not change under the Common Core. Lessons will continue to be based on well-crafted learning objectives with frequent checking for understanding and the provision of timely feedback to students so that they understand where they are in the learning process and the teacher understands where they are in the teaching process. The Common Core empowers teachers to remain vigilant to the teaching of essential concepts and basic building blocks in mathematics, reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And it further empowers them to go beyond the teaching of independent and isolated topics and instead integrate curriculum and content to deeply engage students to reason abstractly and quantitatively, to think strategically while attending to precision, and to synthesize and analyze information.
Can you please wrap up? You're a little over 5 minutes already.
Yes, I will.
All right, thank you.
Parents who work directly with their teachers, principals, and district support are seeing their questions of why are we doing this, shifting to an exclamation of I wish I had been taught this way. So I do encourage everyone in the audience, if you have children, to work directly with your principals, your teachers, and our district support. And we're here to help. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now we're going to go into our roundtable discussions. And the panelists will each have 2 minutes to speak to one of the concerns given to you previously or something said by another panelist. When you are done, other panelists will then have the additional 1 minute to respond to whatever you say. So, and that again, remind you, it's 2 minutes and go. I will go that way. No. All right, Dr. Ladd, please.
To respond to what colleagues have said, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is, as we continue to go forward, there's been suggestion that the Common Core asks. They're going to hear me on the 3rd floor if I get it any closer. This is a hotel, after all.
I just gave you 15 seconds.
Thank you.
Okay.
That at the end of the day, people are asking about rigor and so forth, and so I've heard a comment that's made that says, you know, students are being asked to talk about mathematics and be able to explain the foundation of what's taking place mathematically. But we need our students to be able to understand math literacy. There's absolutely no foundation to the belief that we're not going to have students understand multiplication. 4 times 4 is 16. It was yesterday. It was a month ago. It will be a month from now. And it will be 10 years from now. It is important that we look at mathematics so that when our children come through our K-12 system, that not only do they understand the mathematics in numeracy, but they also understand the why, the understanding, the foundation that gets them so that they can then apply and use that mathematical foundation in their life. So that first point of conversation for me is, I want to assure the public that our students are going to know multiplication and fractions and division. They're going to understand mathematics, but more importantly, they're going to understand why the mathematics is, and we're going to ask our students to be able to demonstrate their understanding as well. So I'll stop there, but I wanted to kind of share that notion in relative to rigor and what we expect rigor to look like and be like in Elk Grove.
Okay, thank you. Our next would be Ms. Mercer.
Okay. So I want to focus over on the standards themselves, and it's been pointed out, and I've noticed a lot of times that nationally when folks are talking about these standards, they really don't talk about them specifically, which makes for a very odd discussion, because then you're having a meta discussion about the politics of it, as you've pointed out, or just very odd things. So I'm going to try something that may or may not work here, because this is a lay audience and I'm an educator, and I'm going to try not to get too jargony on it. But I'm going to pick out just one standard, a reading standard and a writing standard, and talk about kind of what some of the problems are here. So a 4th grade standard says, draw evidence from literary or informational text to support analysis, reflection, and research. So that's the 4th grade standard. 8th grade says, cite textual evidence that most strongly supports an analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. Now, the thing that's odd about those 2 standards is the first one says draw evidence and support analysis, and that's writing standard. The second one is asking students to cite when they're reading. And some of it is intentional because they want the reading and writing to go together. But some of it really doesn't make sense, because when you are reading, you do not cite text. And then it goes on in some other areas where they'll do things like that, it makes it kind of inconsistent. In fourth grade, it asks them to go over and determine 2 central ideas to a text and analyze their development over the course of the text. Well, if you're reading a text with 1 central idea or with 3, it doesn't work quite as well. And it's some of those editorial things that really were not given enough attention because of how rushed it was when they did the initial design of these standards. And then by the time they rolled over to California, they were adopted quite quickly because some of the reasoning behind the adoption had more to do with getting qualified for Race to the Top money and other money at a time when we were in a really deep recession. I don't know that these are necessarily game breakers around these standards, but they're things that will need to get straightened out. And I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you very much. All right, next panelist, Ms. Ellis. Oh, I'm sorry. Maggie Ellis? Yeah, I was right, okay.
I'm a miss.
A miss, okay.
There is no doubt that our politicians don't always know what they're voting on. There is just, that is a given.
Okay, I'm out of here.
So, not here.
Up there, okay.
The big house up there. The other part of what I do is I also do CalSTRS, which is our teacher pension. And I have been many times in those offices, and they're voting on big money issues. They don't even understand that. So it doesn't surprise me that they don't understand Common Core. But it's our job to educate them. I would love for politics not to be part of a teacher's job, but unfortunately, we've been forced into that. Many teachers would just love to go in the classroom, close the door, and teach. That's what we truly love to do. But politics has become infused in our educational system more than I think a lot of the countries that we're trying to be compared to, where politics is not part of it. They just do what is right. Comments about standards nationwide. I totally respect states having decisions and standards for all children. I think there is value to having a level of standards for all children. Now, how they reach that and the pace at which they reach that or advance above that, that's all within our control. With your control as a parent, with our control as a teacher, working collaboratively, we want students to meet their highest potential. And those standards give us what we're shooting for. Some kids are going to far surpass that in a very short amount of time. I have some math wizards that in my 20 years of being in this district have surpassed every other class I've ever had. I'm going to have to work hard to figure out what to do with them next because they get it. I have that control. But I don't want the conversation about standards across the U.S. and how one district is different than the next or a state is different from the next to say we shouldn't let our kids move towards a very high standard that we want for all of our citizens. We have to have that level that we want, the bright star in the sky, understanding there's going to be different levels to get there. I don't want to think I'm going to teach you less because you're in a poverty school. I'm going to teach you higher because you're in a more affluent school. We want all students to reach a potential, and I think these standards give us what we're reaching for. Not the path that we're going to get there, but what we are reaching for.
Thank you. I can call you Miss, Mrs., or hey you, but my mother taught me to be very polite, so it's always going to be Miss Weinzinger.
Thank you. It's very difficult to pick what particular thing to speak to you about in such a short amount of time because there's so many concerns and there's so many things. First of all, but I think I would like to concentrate on the fact that the local control in all of this is going to be lost. I don't know how many of my colleagues here on the board are aware of what's going on around the country in terms of the implementation of Common Core. There are many states that are further along in it than we are here. And because I have a Facebook page of nearly 10,000 people from all over the country, including teachers, school board members, legislators, and others, and especially parents, I hear a lot about what's going on. And I'm hearing about teachers who are frustrated, parents who are frustrated because their students are coming home hating school now because of this. Teachers are leaving their profession, they're retiring early or they're quitting. These are not things that I'm making up. It's stories that I'm hearing. I'm hearing about teachers in the New York area that are up and ready to riot against this. And I'm hearing about those who, we talk about autonomy and the fact that teachers are going to have the opportunity to teach this to the standards the way they feel are best, and that us parents are going to have an opportunity to have a say in that. And that's not happening in those other states. And I had one teacher write to me and said, I have an administrator that walks into my classroom to make sure that I am teaching what I'm supposed to be teaching at the time that I'm supposed to be teaching it, and if I'm not, then they're writing me up. Now, I know it's not here yet, because that's what's going to be happening. And I'm telling you, if it can happen in New York, it can happen in California. We are just further behind in the implementation of it. And so I'm telling you, there are teachers, there's a whole Facebook group of teachers. They call themselves the Badass Teachers. 32,000 of them on Facebook who are against Common Core. That says a lot. So this is not just an issue of this is just about standards. It is about standards, but in reality it's not just about standards. And the control that we are going to have as educators, as school districts, as parents, we're not going to have that control. And so we need to look at that, and if it may not feel like that now, but if we see it slipping away, we better darn do something about it.
Thank you. Mr. Cerruti, please.
Thank you. I'd somewhat like to respond to those last comments, if I would, because while I certainly respect the perspective on it, the idea that it's coming, and it's coming to California, meaning what I'm referring to is, and I apologize if I characterize this incorrectly, but any sort of, if teachers aren't teaching in a specific way, they will be written up, and that it will be a limited or dictated type of curriculum and instructional practice. I can say with 100% certainty that will not happen in Elk Grove. And the teachers in this room would say that much louder than I would. The reason Elk Grove has been as successful as it is because it's been a highly collaborative environment where we are empowering our teachers and our site administrators to make the very best decisions on a daily basis for your children, and that's exactly what they do. Well, I certainly understand the concern about the loss of local control, and can understand to a certain degree if there's an uncertainty about where this all came from. But that idea of loss of local control is also embedded in there is a misunderstanding or a miscommunication of the difference between standard and curriculum. Because California has standards. California has new, improved standards, but local school districts still will adopt and make curriculum decisions, and they're making individual instructional decisions every day, and that will not change. And I'd like to just touch very quickly on cost for a minute, and I realize this could go on for quite a while.
You have 45 seconds.
And thank you, and I'll keep it very brief. And there are three areas of cost: material, professional development, and technology. And if the Common Core was not here, we would have very similar needs in terms of cost in all three areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes our roundtable discussion. There was a question up here earlier that we failed to ask. Are there any school board members and/or administrators in attendance? If so, would you please stand up and share with us what school you're from, if you would please. I'll start here with board member.
From Unified School District.
Okay.
Board member of 34 years.
I'm sorry, sir. Oh, hi.
President of the board.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi, I'm
Yes.
Carmen Corchina, the school board member for Elk Grove Unified School District in Trustee Area 7.
Good. Mr. Lee?
Yeah, Steve Lee, Elk Grove Unified, board member.
Where are the teachers? Okay, please stand and let us know what school you're teaching. Okay, we'll go over here. Okay, first row, and then we'll go back and back. Okay.
Todd Newcomb, John Ehrer Elementary.
Cheryl Hollis, Elida Donner.
Kathy Harris, fellow.
Mickey Hill, Women Creek High School. Kathleen T. on Toby Johnson Middle School.
Elizabeth Steele, curriculum professional.
Mike Nelson, Dillard Elementary School.
Kristen Cushel, at Calvine High School.
I'm Weaver May, I'm a teacher at Jesse Baker School.
Yeah.
Julia Batts, Sunrise Elementary.
Ken Fox, Sunrise Elementary.
How many retired teachers? I want to identify, you worked very hard, and I'd like to identify you as well, our retired teachers. Please stand. Yes, okay. And your name, sir? What school did you were you at last when you retired?
Joseph Kerr, Harriet Eddy, Franklin High School.
Oh, you hit them all. Great. Be careful with the cord.
Sarah Freepy, Concord Elementary.
Okay. Any?
Tina, Santa Clara County Office of Education.
Olga?
Olga Beatty, former school board member, teacher, and Joseph Kerr.
Good, all right. Thank you. Thank you. I may not be a teacher or an educator, but I was a teacher kind of and an educator kind of because I, raised my girls here and they graduated, went through the whole Unified School District, Elk Grove Unified School District system, and now I have the privilege of having my two of my great-grandchildren in the system now as well. But I can tell you one thing, 11 years ago, when we lost our daughter and we had the 4 grandchildren left, without a mom, the school district, without a doubt, I got a call, and I believe it was Mr. Gordon, I believe, that called and said, we want to come over and, just talk to the kids. And he came, sat on the floor in my home, and talked to the kids, and it was something that I will never, ever forget. That's what makes this school district so special and so dear to our hearts. And I want to thank you very much this evening for all of you coming this evening. You could have waited until the end, but the opportunity came as far as being a teacher, and I'm thinking, I don't have the credentials, but I have the credentials of a grandma and a great-grandma, so I think that's good enough, huh? Okay, I'd like to welcome Bill Evers, who just arrived. You were a little... how about we let you collect your thoughts, and then we'll...
All I can say is it's lovely to be out in this part of the world where the traffic is not. Although the individual who came here from Santa Clara County Office of Education, which I used to be on the board of, certainly knows what I'm talking about.
Okay. So you just let me... Yeah, your microphone is on, sir?
Okay.
Is it on? It should be. Yeah,
Well, I have
closer.
to...
There you go. Okay.
Anyway, all I was saying was the traffic was terrible.
Okay, and when you are ready, sir, I'd like to hear a little bit about yourself, opening statement.
I'm a research fellow studying school improvement, school reform at Stanford University, and I was the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Education for Policy in the George W. Bush administration. And I also ran the school system in Iraq in 2003. Done a number of things in California. I served on the Academic Standards Commission in the late 1990s, and then again in 2010 when we considered the Common Core curriculum content standards, the national standards. I served on the Santa Clara County Board of Education, and I also served as a board member and president of a highly successful charter school in East Palo Alto. Let me take you back to the announcement of the completion of the Common Core standards. And so this was in June of 2010, and it was in North Carolina, and they were meeting in a high school. And the people announcing it said several things. And these are academic things, and then and so they're very short run, immediate, of concern to parents and grandparents and teachers and administrators right now. So they said, these standards are the best in the world. They're second to none. They're internationally benchmarked. This is not true. This is not true. A member of the validation committee for the Common Core National Standards, Jim Milgram, one of the most eminent research mathematicians in the world, an expert also on K-12 education, who's had a great deal of experience working on it, said they are, by 8th grade, at least 2 years behind the highest performing countries. And yet that's what they were supposed to be benchmarked to the high performing countries. Similar statements were made by Professor Jonathan Goodman of the Courant Institute of New York University, who did a similar analysis. They said, when it was announced in North Carolina, they said, the standards are designed to facilitate algebra in 8th grade. This is because they desperately wanted California to sign on. Well, I know because I had to wrestle with the California standards and the national standards to try to mesh them. And it was not possible to really have a situation where we could hang on to Algebra 1 in 8th grade, which had been the glory of math reform and school reform in California. We have had so many waves of school reform in California, it's really embarrassing to those of us in the field. This aspiration, this goal of Algebra 1 in 8th grade has been an amazing thing because it actually succeeded. There was an excellent column by Daniel Weintraub the other day, where he said, essentially, California is giving up the most successful school reform it's ever had by giving up these standards and tests. Now, he said, maybe these new ones will do something better, but he said, we're giving up the best we've ever had. And really, we could do better than Common Core. We can certainly improve on Common Core. Anyway, this attempt to mesh the California math standards so that we could have Algebra 1 in 8th grade was a failure. And even all the excellent additions and supplementations that we put in because of the things that were missing, things like, numerous things that are missing, the Brown administration basically has wiped out. But, in terms of the success here, we had, over the last decade, African-American students taking Algebra 1 in 8th grade went up 4-fold. For Latino students, it went up 6-fold. This is basically being thrown away. It's going to be Algebra 1 in 9th grade. This is retrogression. This is retardation for these students. They are going backwards. The whole system, all the people that have been in the channel to get to Algebra 1 in 8th grade, they have to be slowed down now. They're going too fast. They're going too fast. So we, instead of matching the high-performing countries that get Algebra 1 in 8th grade or the equivalent, we're going backwards. So there's another serious concern that I have, and I can talk about English and lots of other things.
You have 1 minute, sir.
Yeah, that's why I'm going to switch to this. There's another serious concern I have, and that is the structure of liberty that we pass on to our own children and that we live with. And this involves our constitutional structure, our Madisonian structure of federalism. So we, in order to preserve our liberty, in order to have an effective, representative, limited government, we have various features: checks and balances, separation of powers, and federalism. So federalism is different levels of government: the national government, the state government, the county government, the city government, and so forth. And we have a system in this Madisonian design of competitive federalism. So all the cities are offering, different things, different packages, they're different candidates, they're different political parties. So if you're in the Boston area, for example, you have multitudes of school districts, each looking for people who are at that income level. And so it's better to have competition in delivery of services. You can find liberty in that, you can find innovation in that, you can better match voter preferences. But with the Common Core and with giving this over as a monopoly to one set of people, we are giving up that competitive pressure for excellence.
Okay, will you wrap it up, please?
And I'm going to finish with this. It is better to have, instead of one national federal level office that's deciding this, it's better to have 50 states. And it's better than to have 50 states, it's better to have 15,000 school districts. And we are giving this up as we centralize these things in a way that's counterproductive and not healthy for our future.
Thank you very much. You have not caught up with everybody's time that they were allotted from beginning to end, so now we're all on the same page. Okay, now we're going to go into the good stuff. That's the questions from the audience. And as you notice, there's a microphone here and over there. And when you come forward, please identify yourself. We don't need your address because that's kind of personal. But just say your name and if you're a resident, where you are. If you're not within the Elk Grove Unified School District, then I don't know why you're here. But we'll take your questions anyway. Yes, ma'am. Yes, we're ready. And you have 1 minute to ask your questions, and the panelists will have 2 minutes for responses.
My name is Susan Mason. I live in Elk Grove. Are the standards copyrighted, and is there a mechanism to correct obvious errors that are in them and omissions in the Common Core standards?
Do you have that for a special panelist?
Nope, just
anybody.
anyone.
Okay, who would like to take that one?
I'll be glad.
Dr. Oh, I'm sorry.
Speak and get your mic close.
I'll be glad to answer it.
All right, sir, you have
they are
1 minute.
copywritten. And a state like California that is adhering to the standards has to accept them the way they are, even though there are mistakes, serious things, and statistics that are just not mathematics, even though in reading the long and short vowels are wrong in the wrong grades and primary grades, even though there's a way of teaching similar and congruent triangles called rigid motion that's never been successfully taught in K-12 education anywhere in the United States, in any state, in any city, in any school district. This is highly experimental. There's no way to change it. You have to accept it 100%. You can add on some things, but you cannot correct, and there is no mechanism for correction.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next question? We'll go on this side. We'll take turns.
My name is Kristen Couchot. Again, I'm a teacher in this district and also a parent in the Elk Grove Unified School District. And I have to say that I have always felt fortunate that my children can go to school here and not in another district. And after tonight, I have never felt more fortunate. My question actually, Ms. Weinzinger, is for you. If you believe that students should not all be taught the same standards, then I'm curious to know which groups of students do you feel we should teach less rigorous standards to? In other words, which students do we select for a life of less?
Well, first of all, I didn't say that we shouldn't have standards. I just said that, or maybe I didn't clarify well enough. The standards should be determined by the states, not by some nebulous group of people, and then pushed through an organization like the National Governors Organization and the Chief Schools State Officers Organization. That is something that we should be taught, that those in our areas should be able to determine. Like I said, I'm not against standards, and I don't think we should have different standards for different children. I'm just saying that it's not something that should be done on a national level. It needs to be done on a more local level, and that we should get to determine. And I think that teachers should be able to be involved in it because they're the ones that are in the trenches teaching our children. They should be helping. Teachers were not involved in this, in making these standards. There was nobody really, except for just a few educators that are higher up educators, and even some of them decided that the standards as they ended up being were not as rigorous as we're told that they are. And so I'm not against standards. I just don't
But you
think...
did say that even students within your own district and this state were different, and that they should not be held to the same standards.
No, that's not what I said. I said they're different, but I didn't say that they should not be held to the same standards. Maybe I didn't clarify enough, but that they should not have to be held to the same standards from state to state, and that each state should have to determine what their standards are, not some outside group.
Okay,
So
would another
we did-
panelist like to respond?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Mr. Evers?
So we did have a time when the Democrats in the state legislature were so determined to have Latinos have a separate lower track of academics. They had a Netflix. Reed Hastings was thrown off the board by the Democrats in the state legislature. Marion Joseph, who had been Riley's chief aide, was thrown off the state board because these people who were Democrats thought that Hispanics and whites should have the same expectations. Now, I think what my colleague is pointing out is it's a little weird to take a state like Mississippi or Louisiana, and tomorrow say, well, you're going to be performing at the level of Massachusetts. And it's, lots of people have said this. Al Shanker, the famous but now deceased head of the American Federation of Teachers, said that's asking for a disaster. But of course, that's what we're looking at.
Thank you. Another question? This side? No? Okay, sir.
Kevin Almeida, Elk Grove. I'm kind of wondering what was wrong with the curriculum that sent our astronauts to the moon and built aircraft carriers and our superpower and made intelligent teachers like yourselves. What was wrong, that's the one question, with the old curriculum? The other question is, could this Common Core be rooted in money? Is the federal government withholding grant money unless you accept or are compelled to teach this Common Core? And the third thing is this evolving or leading us into socialized education, just like our current socialized medicine attempt? Thank you.
A panelist would like to take this?
I'm happy to respond. I'll respond briefly to that, or at least portions of it. In terms of what was wrong with the curriculum that sent astronauts to the moon, nothing, except at that time they were also using slide rules. And we don't fly to the moon in the same with the same technology. So I'm not being critical. I'm saying things have changed, and information and knowledge has changed, and thus our standards, curriculum, and instructional practices need to change and adapt for a much more informed society. In terms of not using the same knowledge and information, no, because what we're doing is we're sending satellites around Jupiter right now. In terms of grants, the Elk Grove's grant writer and grant acquisitions is part of Education Services, so that lives in my division. And we've seen, with the exception of Race to the Top, which had some Common Core connection with it, but it actually didn't directly adhere explicitly to the Common Core, the grants that we're going for, federal grants or state grants, we are seeing no adjustment or no change as a result of the Common Core. Good question, but we are seeing no change.
Another panelist like to respond to that? Dr. Ladd? No?
I'll let Dr. Evers go, and then I'll respond.
Okay. Dr. Evers?
Well, the feds give out what are called conditional grants and aid. So what this means is, like, we'll give you money for your highways, but you have to have a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. That's the sort of way it works. And so actually California is right now on a confrontational path with the U.S. Department of Education, because California has adopted these supposedly wonderful standards and supposedly adopted them back in August of 2010. But the state says, well, we're not ready yet. And so we're going to suspend accountability and have a sort of complicated pick one from column A, one from column B sort of testing thing. Very hard to really describe. And the national government has said no and threatened to take money away. So there is a strong coercive element involved here. There is no doubt, no serious person who's looked at the Common Core standards thinks that they would have been adopted by all these states, 40-plus states, in 2 months between the beginning of June 2010 and the beginning of August 2010 if it weren't for the club of federal money and the enticement of federal money. So this plays a large part, and it would be better and healthier for competitive federalism and trying different things and better things if we could get out of being trapped in Father Knows Best in Washington, D.C.
Dr. Ladd?
I'm unaware of the money that Dr. Evers is talking about from the federal government coming for Common Core. The race to the top that has been rolled out from the recent administration was not anchored in Common Core, and it was actually anchored in a number of other ideas that the Department of Education wanted to move forward, but it wasn't anchored in the Common Core. The federal role of dollars in public education goes back to Sputnik era, and the biology and physics curriculum that came out during the Sputnik era was funded by the federal government, but so is Head Start. Harkin just put out I believe it was $20 billion over the next 4 years for early education that just went to Congress yesterday. It's still not linked to the Common Core. So the role of federal government, I'm going to leave it to the citizens and the opportunity to talk with people that are in the legislature, at state capitals and federal, but I don't see any federal dollars coming from Common Core. With your comment to the curriculum that was good enough to get folks to the moon, we have a couple of handouts. The previous standards in California for language arts said that we wanted reading, writing, listening, speaking, written, and oral language conventions. The Common Core standards have 4 areas of instruction: reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language. Virtually all of the California's former ELA standards are embedded in the Common Core. There has not been a wholesale change as being described. In mathematics, virtually all of the California math standards are embedded in the Common Core. The major difference is that they're now found at grade levels, in our opinion, that reflects research-based coherence across grade levels K-8 and courses in high school. So the juxtaposition of the federal government's role, we don't have a national curriculum. It's been described as such, but there are actually 2 consortiums in the United States right now that are working on the Common Core. One is PARC, and most of the states in the eastern United States belong to PARC, and most of the states in the western United States belong to Smarter Balance. And these consortiums are made up by states representing states, and so I, for one, don't believe that there's been any legislation passed at the national level that said we are adopting, as many of the major countries that are now being reflected in other international studies that have nationalized, adopted national standards, that has been adopted by the Congress of the United States of America.
Dr. Evers?
I have to offer some careful thoughts on what was just said here. So the first claim that was made is there were no federal dollars involved in promoting and enticing people into the Common Core. That's simply not true. To succeed in the grant competitions that were part of Race to the Top, and this was at the height of the recession, you can see that Massachusetts applied in the first round had not yet accepted Common Core, had submitted the exact same application, except for accepting the Common Core, and immediately was one of the high performers on the second round. There is no doubt that this was the lesson that the U.S. federal government was sending to the states. You must climb onto this in order to get the points to get these millions of dollars. Talking about a previous attempt at national curriculum, the new math, the new biology, the new physics, and so forth after Sputnik in the Eisenhower era, that's perfectly fine to talk about that, but of course it was a joke. I mean, the new math, there's a famous, funny, comedic song by Tom Lehrer about the new math in which the refrain is, only a child can do it. And this was, this was not math, not in the base 10 and all sorts of things that it collapsed within a few years, even though at that time, every publishing house that did books for K through 12 education had their math offerings using the new math. And so, the Goals 2000 had 48 states in the latter days of the Clinton administration. Within a few years, it totally collapsed. There is a history of these things. They sound like the latest sliced bread. They are the fad of the day. And they meet with discontent from teachers and from parents and from students. I don't know if the leaders of this district can say that the geometry teachers are trained to be able to successfully teach similar and congruent triangles by rigid motion instead of through the old standard algorithms of side, angle, angle, side, angle. If they want to certify in public now that the teachers are prepared to do this, I would be fascinated to hear that.
Okay. Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Hi, Alice Mercer. And going over and looking at this, I think it's a little bit more complicated even than Dr. Ladd might have led on, because there are some other states like Georgia who are opting out of the two testing consortia now. And we could be heading towards a sort of Wild West. And I know this does not add clarity to it, to looking at this. It's becoming a less clear situation with the testing, I believe. California is also quite unusual in that, and I think I can safely say this, and Ms. Ellis will correct me if I'm wrong, we are not interested in race to the top money, I would say pretty clearly at the state level. Our state governor is not interested. Our superintendent of public instruction is not interested. However, they are both supportive of Common Core standards. And so we're in a weird, squidgy place compared to states like New York, where they are implementing race to the top. These tests are counting not just for the kids, but for the teachers. Could we, and the schools, could we end up there? Possibly, but the context is very different here, and you need to kind of be aware of that, because some of the solutions could be very different than they end up being over in a state like New York.
I want to bring it back to the teacher level, because I think that's where a lot of parents are concerned, is what's happening with their child in the classroom with the teacher. And with the shift to Common Core, a lot of it is going to be focused on professional development. And generalizations of saying side angle side is not going to be taught anymore and it's going to be shifting over to this one method is totally inaccurate. It is one of the measures in mathematics that we're going to continue to teach. It's like Dr. Ladd said, we're not going to stop teaching multiplication. I'm not going to stop teaching addition from right to left, the ones, tens, hundreds, but I'm also going to teach children how to look at numbers using hundreds, using tens, using regrouping. The language that my students in 5th grade right now that are in their discussions is blowing me away. Their understanding of regrouping is higher than I have ever seen in any class that I've had, because of the methodology in which professional development has helped me to understand. I wish I had been taught this way, because some of my number sense would have been a lot stronger when I was switched from Illinois to Oklahoma and I hadn't learned multiplication yet. That basic number sense I would have had, but because I did not learn a number sense from kindergarten to 3rd grade, I was not able to shift gears that quickly. The students that I'm teaching today are going to be much more well-versed in number sense and understanding numbers and applying them to different situations. They're problem solving. They are not afraid of problem solving. They look at those things and it's a challenge. They look for error patterns in each other's work as well as in the textbook. They might find an error. We find that as teachers. Find my error. I had a student today, Miss Ellis, you did that problem incorrectly. I'm like, great job. I make the errors too. So what can we learn from each other? So for parents, the conversation comes back to having a dialogue with me as a teacher. What is my child learning? I don't understand what they're coming home with. I know that's going to happen. That's the frustration. That's where the conversation needs to begin with us. It's not the political conversation about Common Core, about the federal government, about the state government. It's what's happening in our schools with your child, your teachers, in our district. What is our professional development? To me, this other conversation about politics, I totally get it. But that's not the world your child is living in. Your child is living in what skills are we going to get them prepared for the next grade, for their future. What is it they want to become? And I truly believe that through our professional development, no, I'm not going to be able to teach what you're talking about today because, quite honestly, I don't understand that. I can do side angle side. But I have a math expert over here that days ago, when there was something in my math manual I didn't understand, I went to him and said, you better teach me this now because I got to teach it tomorrow. And within 10 minutes, I got it. The next day, my students got it. The next day after that, 4 more teachers at my grade level got it because we were all teaching each other. This is an incredible time, and I don't want to get the conversation about curriculum and standards to get lost in what we are actually doing with students day to day.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Rivers.
So I don't disagree with you that what is happening in the classroom and what is happening with the children is of primary importance, but also their future and the future of our political institutions is actually quite important for them and their lives and grandchildren and on and on. Now, one of the things that you were talking about was number sense and how you tackle a problem and regrouping and so forth. So I don't know what was said, of course, before I got here, but so when you in the standard algorithm, when you are dealing with multiple digit numbers and you're adding or subtracting, you think about it, you stack them above each other. And the standard algorithm, the standard problem solving technique, you start in the ones column, and if you're subtracting and you need to, you borrow and so forth. And if you're adding and you need to, you carry and you continue across the tens column, hundreds column, and so forth. Now, in the Pearson textbook, which is the dominant textbook, Common Core aligned textbook, you don't start in the ones column, you start in the hundreds column. And throughout, and then you decompose the number and do various things, and eventually you get to the ones column. Now, and as Ms. Ellis said, there are multiple algorithms that are now being taught in the classroom, and her hope is that they're going to gain in number sense. And there are also student-invented algorithms that are called for in the Common Core and in the curriculum that is attached to it that is used in California schools. Now, there is a problem with this. The reason we have standard algorithms is because they are the most effective, they are the easiest to teach, they are the easiest to learn, they are the quickest, they are the most efficacious. There are other ways to do things, such as this rigid motion instead, as a way of doing similar and congruent triangles. Problem is that the research shows that students tend to get confused if they're taught multiple algorithms. They start combining incompatible parts of algorithms and things like this. And this is a very serious problem in math instruction. This particular curriculum content standards have never been tried. They weren't tried in any school district to see if they worked someplace. They were just flat out brought to the whole country and imposed through federal pressure. Now, what about the state tests? So she's talking about the Smarter Balance test, which is the one that's here in California. The brains behind it, the person normally credited as being the leading intellectual figure behind it, is Professor Linda Darling Hammond at Stanford. She's a well-known proponent of progressive education, learn through play, learn through creativity, learn through student discovery, and so forth. And, you know, there are merits to this depending on the lesson and the skill of the teacher and where the kids are and so forth. But she really favors it across the board. And she has said in interviews that she intends to push this in the test, that here is a real case of the teachers having to teach to the test, because she's going to impose this kind of progressive education on the classrooms of California and other states that adhere to this. And instead of the test really measuring the students' mastery of the subject matter, it's going to be, are they having the procedural teaching methods of progressive education in the classroom? I honestly think that's an extremely bad thing, and contrary to good practice and standards and testing and accountability. But she says she's determined to move the needle, and that if we're going to change pedagogy in America, we have to use tests.
Okay. Sir, you have a question?
Yes.
To a particular panelist or just a question overall?
Well, we'll see who can take it. First of all, I'm glad that everything's so exciting in school right now. It sounds wonderful. I have a personal experience with Common Core so far this year. So our first experience with Common Core was, of course, the letter we got, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 weeks before school started. And of course, the whole summer before school, I was thinking, boy, we dodged the bullet, because I'm thinking, we're lucky we didn't have to deal with this Common Core thing yet, so we have some more time to kind of prepare for it, right? And then I get a letter 2 or 3 weeks before class starts saying, by the way, everyone, it's very exciting times at school. We're doing Common Core. Isn't it wonderful? So I felt like it was a little bit of short notice, personally, and I felt like it was done that way on purpose to not let us activate quickly. I would like, my question is, whose decision was it to wait? Because maybe the Elk Grove Unified School District didn't know that Common Core was going to be starting the beginning of this semester until 3 weeks before school started, but I'm guessing that they probably did know. Now, the other experience I had was when we went to back to school night. So we go back to school night, talking about stuff, and we get to the Common Core discussion, which was very brief. It was about 30 seconds. And basically, the teacher said, look, we don't know any of this stuff, so instead of teaching 6th grade math this year, we're going to be teaching 5th grade math, because the teachers need time to learn the material as well as the students, and everything's going to be different. So my advanced 90% plus, math student is now learning 5th grade, low-end 5th grade math. That's not some story on the internet, that's actually our story. And then the other comment I have is that I understand, people don't want to politicize things, but when you're accepting commandments from the federal government, you're going to have to deal with the consequences of that, just like we have to deal with the consequences of these decisions. The people on the board, the teachers, everybody involved is going to have to just deal with it. If you don't like it, that's too bad, because some of us aren't happy about it. And we have the right to not be happy, because the money out of my wallet is going to pay for all of the technology that's going to be required for Common Core to track my daughter all the way through. Every little nook and cranny of her life is going to be logged into a computer system so that someone in Washington can determine where she should maybe go to school or what she should do for a living.
Okay, what was your question, sir?
My question was,
yes.
How much notice did the Elk Grove Unified School District have that they were going to be implementing Common Core this semester?
Thank you. Anyone wish to address that?
Well,
and
I
how,
have to
and
say...
how about also... But answer his thing about the retardation of the
I'd like to
math,
answer
too.
his question first, please.
We have been implementing Common Core for a while. It didn't just start this semester, so I'm kind of... there might have been the letter that we sent out as a district that came out during this summer. But our K-3 teachers have been implementing Go Math for 2 years now. 3 years. 2 years. K-2, sorry. 3-6 was implementing ELA last year. And then we switched this year and added each of the grade levels. 3 through 6 did Go Math on top of ELA, and K3 added the ELA, or K2 added the ELA this year. So this is not new to the district. To the issue of a 6th grade teacher teaching 5th grade math, number one, we don't get 5th grade materials. I get my 5th grade, I don't get 4th grade. So a 6th grade teacher would not have access to an entire textbook of 5th grade materials. They might have, as a 5th grade teacher, I might have looked back into 4th grade to see what was missing that I needed to pre-teach my kids before then doing the 5th grade material. But I'm not teaching my kids 4th grade math. They already went through 4th grade math. They're in 5th grade math, doing what the adoption is that we have done for Go Math. They're doing 5th grade. I would assume that your 6th grade teacher is using the 6th grade curriculum. And if I have children who are more advanced, I advance them. I give them more challenging problems. If I have children that are struggling, then I'm going to work to shore up what their skills are. I do teach my kids the algorithm. I also teach them looking at what the word problem is or what the problem is, what is the most efficient way of solving these problems. There is still an emphasis on algorithms, but there is an emphasis on looking at the whole process of computational skills, procedural skills, conceptual understanding, and problem solving. Within that, there's a lot of math, a lot of math. So to address your question, this has not been just suddenly happening. We've been having discussions for at least 2 years now.
Okay, thank you. I have a question over here. Ma'am?
Hi, Kimberly Woods, Elk Grove School District. Both of my children have gone through and are still going through Elk Grove School District. I have 2 questions. This one is probably for you, Dr. Ladd. Laguna Creek High School just became an International Baccalaureate World Scholar School, so I'd like to know how this Common Core standard is going to affect the International Baccalaureate program that has all of its own, and I don't think any rigor can get any greater than that program. And then secondly, this goes to what the gentleman before me said. You're saying that you guys knew for 2 years or so that the Common Core standards were coming. When I was looking for schools to put my children in, I was able to get the standards for the Elk Grove School District to see what the standards were from kindergarten through 12th grade. I don't have that. I'm leaving here tonight just as confused as when I walked in the door, to be honest with you, with Common Core, and I'm really praying that it has no effect on the International Baccalaureate program, because that'll make me happy. But I'm not hearing the parents. These are our children. I appreciate the teachers. I have appreciated the Elk Grove School District. It has been wonderful. I'm a very active parent, very involved in my children's education, and I'm not getting that with this common standard. It's being shoved down my throat, and I don't like that.
Dr. Ladd?
Thank you. As I said just a few moments ago, virtually all of the standards that were in place previously have now been embedded into the Common Core state standards that the state of California adopted. And the state of California adopted these standards a couple years ago. So when people are saying now, I never heard, didn't know, don't know, I can understand that, because we live in an 8-second soundbite world where everybody's running pretty hard, and if you're not dialed into watching the kinds of policy wonk stuff that takes place, it can get by you quickly. With the IB program is going to continue to move and operate with the same rigor and the same standards that it has now, because the standards that California has adopted are all that the Common Core has embedded. It remains. So you're not going to have to worry about the IB program not being able to move forward. With regard to the second part, we have a very, very vibrant website. The work that we've done in Elk Grove Unified School District is available. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's put out. It's on the handout here. on a flyer that we've distributed, and you can go to that website. I ask you to do that. The work that Ms. Blomquist, who is here, I want to give kudos to her and the team that worked with her. The language arts rubric that we're using right now is being used by many, many educators in many states. Over the summer, I had a call from the Colorado Department of Education that said, we really like your website. You guys are doing amazing work. It's very clear. It's very robust. We understand the rigor. We understand the alignment. Can we use it? And we say, absolutely. The only thing we ask is if you do use it, that you give attribution to the Elk Grove Unified School District so that it doesn't get changed. Somebody else changes it and makes it different, and all of a sudden now there's a kind of a hybrid floating out there. All we're asking is people use our website and give attribution. The website will link you back to the California Department of Education, our website, and there's a plethora of ability to get information there so that you as parents would be able to continue to search out and get information.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
Question?
Yes. My question would be for those who are pro-Common Core. My name is Manuel Martin. I'm not a resident of Elk Grove, but I am a candidate at the Assembly District, which does include all of Elk Grove. And there's a lot of discussion here about math. And math is very important, very integral. But there's not a discussion about history. And going to what Bill Evers was saying and how we have a Madisonian view of a federal government, and we have this idea called federalism, in which states compete against one another. And the whole point of the Constitution was to keep the federal government small and the state governments active, so that way the people are closer to the representatives and the representatives aren't 3,000 miles away. So with that being said, and human nature being what it is, that once you give someone power, they're not likely to relinquish it, and once they get that power, they're more likely to try to expand it. What motive, what driving force is there for the federal government to teach constitutional history when constitutional history is the antithesis of what they are in this big, gigantic government agency that takes 25% of our economy? Where is the motive for them to teach our students proper constitutional history? Thank you.
A comment? Ms. Weinzinger? I'm sorry.
Mercer.
Mercer, yes.
I'm not on the pro side, but I am in the classroom implementing these. They don't speak to the social studies standards. What I do is when I teach the lessons, I have upped my social studies content that I'm teaching the kids. I'm happy to do that. I was a history major as an undergrad, so it's a great opportunity for me. And so what I do is I use the reading and the writing standards, but for the content, I use the California state standards, which I think are probably due for an update any time now. So that's how you get around it. The problems that could occur is in consortium test if there's content over in there, so that would be something to watch.
Okay.
I'd like to repeat my question. For those who are pro
To the mic.
Yeah, I got it.
Again, thank you. For those who are pro-Common Core, where is the imperative for the federal government to teach a constitution that was designed to keep them small? Where's the human interest?
You still have state standards.
You do have state standards, but Common Core is overriding it.
No, it's actually, that's not the case. That's actually, that's inaccurate.
Dr. Evers?
So there's
I thought you wanted pro-Common Core, though.
Yeah, but I'm replying to what this lady said.
To what I said?
I'm sorry, he was asking.
He's asking for a pro.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I thought you.
Okay.
I'll be pro
Let's
for a
do
minute.
Let's do a pro.
I just wanted to explain that. I wanted to explain something, though. The English standards actually do include they include non-English literature. So as they trumpeted at the time that these standards were announced in June 2010, they feature informational text. And that could be refrigerator repair manuals, it could be bulletins of the San Francisco Fed aimed at the public. Now, who exactly is supposed to teach this? Who is going to be held responsible for this being taught well? It looks possibly like, since they're English standards, that the English teacher is going to be ultimately responsible for the students knowing how to do this. And yet, to me, most English teachers are not especially trained to deal with either refrigerator repair manuals or bulletins of the Federal Reserve Bank. I also think one of the co-authors of the Common Core, David Coleman, it's quite available in a video where he's teaching cold reading or plain reading of the Gettysburg Address, which is a history thing that's at least tangentially related to constitutional history, certainly our central political history, our history of America's ideals. And he teaches the Gettysburg Address without any context. I mean, there's no Civil War, no slavery, it's just incredible. How can you understand what's going on in the Gettysburg Address if you're teaching it in this cold reading style? It could not be more counterproductive and not helpful to the students to understand what's going on. I think this is a really bad thing for teachers and for students to be having this sort of method imposed on them. Now, I don't know. I think that I leave this to some other panelists to see if they can wiggle their way out of it.
Okay.
Dr. Evers, I just want to congratulate you on being pro for that few seconds. That was pretty remarkable. If we're going to call out individual names, we could probably make up all these things. We could find up puppeteers and call names of individuals where one person is doing one thing with the Gettysburg Address and extrapolate it across the national teaching ranks and saying everyone is going to do it that way. I find that to be not the case. I have every confidence in the educators in Elk Grove. They're going to take the important elements of social studies and social science, and with the kinds of social media that we have now, being able to get text evidence so that when children read text materials, they're able to separate out fact from fiction, because there's mythology that gets laid on us all the time. I mean, all of us have our own filters that we're using, and so I suspect that having social studies teachers, English teachers, science teachers, ask students to be able to show in the text material, both technical or good literature. Where do you get your belief statement from? Show me where it was written in the text. Help me reach that conclusion. I think those are good skill sets for young people to be able to do in the 21st century, because we all know if it's on the internet, it's true.
I have speakers. Ms. Beatty?
Yeah, I've lived here I'm an elderly woman. And I have lived here for over 65 years. The school district's wonderful. California's wonderful. The United States of America is wonderful. And I'm hearing all these things that disturbs me, as though the states should run this and we're too much tax because we don't do this. Aren't we all the United States of America? Are we? It really disturbs me that we're just talking about states and states taking this and states taking that. I'm loyal to the United States of America. Well, we all deserve a good education.
Thank you, Olga. Sir? Follow that.
It's pretty good.
But phrase
a lot of
it as
discussion
a
about
question.
not being politicized, but I disagree. You look at the country and how polar we are across the country, absolutely polar. And I see the same thing. I would say anyone who had read the Federalist Papers or the Constitution and find me anywhere where it states a global citizen. That's a pedestrian comment. I mean, it's not. We're not global citizens. And the states do have rights. And for the federal government to shove this down our throats and for it to be implemented without knowledge of parents. I have a daughter in 6th grade. We had no knowledge of this coming. The teachers do not know. I have very close friends that are teachers, and they don't know what to teach next. They're learning as they go. And it seemed pretty bent on a party line to go along with something you don't know and enforce it so solidly with no knowledge to back it up. There's no background in this system to show that it works. Now, when my daughter goes to junior high and they want to see her test scores, and there's no test scores for standardized testing, as there has always been, how does that apply to her going forward? When I want to switch schools or go somewhere else, where do I take with me? Oh, maybe it'll be good next year? They don't know what they're teaching. And when I went to the second night of school and went to sit down, I asked 2 questions. And if they could have shoved me out the door, they would have. All I asked was a simple question. What happens to the standardized testing? What elements of Common Core will be implemented this year? And he was dead silent in the room. Why is that? Why am I such a bad person for asking a question? And why is dissent and debate a bad thing in this country? It is. And we're being castigated that way. And you shake your head and say, oh no, and disagree with everybody. But debate and dissent is how we grow. That's how we learn. We can have common ground, not just Common Core, but common ground. We can find a way to work together. There may be good elements here, but you can't scrap the fundamentals for a pipe dream of what may or may not work down the future when my daughter is in school now. It should have been tried and implemented somewhere on a smaller scale and not globally just thrown out here like this. It's not fair to anyone. And I find it hard to accept solid support without a background. So I would like to know where that support comes from.
Yes.
And I would say that I don't totally support the standards in terms of there are problems. There are going to be problems with every standards. There were problems in the 97 standards. But we as teachers, as professionals, we take a look at what the guide is given to us, and then we are in control of our classrooms and making sure that we reach the best education as possible. To go back to the question about teaching history, the federal government's not going to dictate how I teach history in the classroom. I'm going to teach it as an American of this great country and looking at the colonies and what our forefathers fought for. That is not going to get lost in my students for something that the federal government is doing today with Common Core. I think there's an assumption that there's party lines up here. And I probably, if I had worn my CTA Republican Caucus shirt, y'all would think a little bit different. So, I would hope so, but that's not what I feel a lot of times. And so, as a teacher, I come at the Common Core, what am I going to do with my students in my classroom? What do I need to give them to get the best education and the best knowledge, to let them debate, to let them criticize, to let them look at what it is they're learning and think for themselves. I don't want them to regurgitate bubbled-in letters. I don't know how many of you have looked at the spoof on I Choose C. Go to YouTube and do I Choose C, where they say, well, math is separate from science, which is separate from English. What do you mean I have to write about science? What do you mean I have to write about math? It's all an integrated learning. Math and writing and reading and social studies and science, they're not separate subjects. They're every day of our life, and our students need to understand that and figure out how do they, in their own minds, integrate that knowledge so that they come across with great arguments, with great debates that can come back and challenge our government, challenge our officials. That is what we want to teach our kids. We want them to challenge us. I love it when my kids debate me. Let's prove who's right, who's wrong, where do we see differences, where do we see similarities, and where can we find common ground. That is my challenge as a teacher, to give them those skills.
Okay, excuse me. Your passion as an educator, and I see that and I get that from you. I don't challenge that one bit. So like I said, I have very close friends that are educators, and they love to teach, and they love the children, and they love that opportunity. But they don't love this system.
Can you come to the microphone, please?
They don't know what to do with it.
Sir.
And that's the uncomfortable nature that we're in right now.
Okay, Ms. Wenzinger was next. And then Ms. Ellis, and then,
I just
Mercer.
wanted to say that, first of all, I think I'm pretty educated, and I can know how to debate, and I can know how to question and go after my government when I'm not happy with things, and I wasn't educated under Common Core. So I'm not quite sure why we need new standards to give our children those skills. I think some of us grew up with a lot of those same skills. Maybe not everybody in the same way, but hey, not all of us are the same. But I want to agree with Ms. Ellis that we need to make sure that we don't let the conversation of the standards and the curriculum get lost in the politicization of this. But the problem is, this is political. And we have people up at the top in the federal government who like power. And we have big companies who like money, and they are working together to get that power and that money. And so you cannot erase the political side of this out of this and just concentrate on the standards and the curriculum. The standards and the curriculum definitely need to be debated for our children, but we cannot take the political side out of it because of the fact that it is the top-down approach that's being taken in implementing all of this into our lives.
Thank you. Ms. Mercer, and then followed by...
I'll go over and deal with the microphone.
With the speaker, or the questions? Okay, sir.
Can I?
Dr. Evers?
Yeah.
Yes.
When you have tax dollars, when you have public schools, you're going to have some politics. If you complain about this particular subject getting politicized, it seems like the Obama administration began the politicization of it. It was going along, and Lamar Alexander, the former U.S. Secretary of Education, now a senator from Tennessee, spoke to Arne Duncan, the current secretary, and he said, "Don't entangle this with the federal government." Did Arne Duncan listen? No. Why is it that David Axelrod, the top political operative of the Obama campaign, just yesterday called this an Obama administration initiative? Because even though its origins weren't in the Obama administration, they quickly took it over. That's why the speakers at the Democratic State National Convention talked about it. That's why it was in the Democratic platform. That's why the president took credit for it. And later, the Republican National Committee condemned it as both mediocre in content and as against federalism. So yes, it's gotten political. But who started it? The Obama people are the people who captured this and drove it into the country. And well beyond any natural course that it might have had if it were just exemplary standards, they imposed it on the country through their conditional grants program.
Okay. Thank you. We have a question here, sir.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I appreciate all your input. My concern is my country and my state of California's rights. I respect all the teachers. I think they do a great job. But I'm worried about the control of the government. Now, I could be wrong. I'd like somebody to correct me. But California has already been threatened to have their funds pulled if we don't change our standards on testing. Where do you think it's going to go from there? That's just a start. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the audience? Over here, please.
Do you want to respond to the question first?
Did anyone want to respond to that question? Yes, ma'am. Ms. Mercer.
Since I'm on testing and assessment over at CTA, I guess I'll handle the testing issue. There's a testing moratorium, and it's probably there for a good reason, and it was alluded to by the last two speakers. Because these are new standards, they need to do what's called field testing over on the test. They did not do extensive field testing in New York, and that's been a fiasco, as was alluded to. They had a 30% drop in proficiency scores there. What our state wisely decided to do, because they were not under the pressure of meeting the Race to the Top grant requirements, was to do a moratorium. They are now being threatened with having some funds withheld over from the federal government because of doing that. This is a wise move for your children, because your children should not be judged on a test score, on a test that is being tested. And this is a necessary part of doing new testing. However I feel about the test, I certainly feel that those scores need some time to be looked at. In my closing statement, I'll go over and talk about some of the concerns that I have about it, but I am all for the moratorium because I don't want your children judged on a test that is brand new. And I'm sure that Dr. Ladd does not want your children judged on a test that's brand new. At some point, we probably would have had to change the standards and change the testing, and I would hope that we would take the time to make sure that the test is fair and accurate before going over and starting to apply the scores to students in schools.
Okay, thank you. Question over here, sir.
Yes, my name is Jose Lopez. I'm a parent here in Elk Grove, and we have great teachers in the district. I've been here in the district since '87, and I want to know what we can do as parents to make sure that our students aren't affected in a bad way, because we have rights as parents. The number one right we have is our children and their education. It's not the rights of the teachers, it's the rights of the parents. So this question is to Dr. Evers. What can we do as a district if we want to, as parents, get out of this Common Core standard?
Well,
You have 1 minute to respond, please.
Well, I think as a parent, you can try to supplement where you see weaknesses. And I don't, know in practice whether the district is going to follow the Common Core strictly or modify it in better ways. So, for example, you could make sure your children are reading great literature. That's always a good thing. All of us up here agree on that. See?
And I will teach that great literature too.
If you see math deficiencies of some sort, you can try to find a coach. Maybe there's a kid who's in a math Olympiad that would be willing to do this. Or maybe there's a Sacramento State student or University of Pacific student or something like that. I don't know if you have Kumon or some other kinds of math tutoring companies in this area, but those can also be helpful depending on what the problem is that your child is having difficulty with. But there are ways to supplement and to make up for bad things, and this would have been true also in the older standards in California. Sometimes they're not applied well, or so maybe they have something that's missing in that.
Okay.
I'll just stop there.
All right, thank you. Question?
Hi, my name is Rebecca Dearson. I'm a parent and new to the district. And I guess the biggest problem I have is I keep hearing this race to the top and that we're just average, and that we live in this great school district, but as a country we're just average. How many foreign students come to this country to study in universities from all around the world? We take and we compare ourselves to countries that are the top schools in the world, or Finland, South Korea, Japan. Those come, especially with South Korea and Japan, come at huge costs to families and just their ways of life. But the problem that I have is that many of those countries teach to this, should I say, not the independent thinking that we were built on in this country. We were built from people who come to this country for a better life, that weren't necessarily thought that their ideas were not agreed upon in their country, so they came here to advance themselves. And I feel that this Common Core is sort of taking us back to this, well, we're going to race to the top in the world, but it will come at a price. Countries like Norway, where I have a friend who is a teacher, they will start moving away from possibly doing any type of standardized testing. And we're sitting here talking about, increasing that standardized testing. But the question I guess I have is, you said that Elk Grove School District has been teaching Go Math in K-3 for like the last 2 years. But we're putting a moratorium on the STAR testing. I know that the Set K2 they never took the STAR test, but third grade is where STAR testing started. So if they were being taught Go Math last year, how are their test scores this year? Because they were taught in a method that isn't STAR testing approved, so to speak.
It was actually K2 that did the Go Math last year. So
Okay.
3 through 6 started it this year, and there won't be a test on it.
Okay.
I had the privilege of hearing Jerry Brown talk about that testing, and kudos to him, because that was part of the stressor. With other countries, they do a lot less testing. For some reason, this country thinks testing more is a better thing, and I think for our students, it creates more stress. It doesn't necessarily show the performance that they're capable of doing. I think you as parents, you see the performance that your kids are doing on a daily or a weekly basis. You see what's coming home from school. You know what their true performance is. A state test has its value, but I agree. We in this country, we invest way too much of it, and I personally believe it's rooted in corporations. And they make a lot of money off of our testing system. And by California pulling a moratorium, you guarantee there's a lot of CEOs freaking out that other states are going to do the same thing, because that's their pocketbook. We as a district are very interested in tests that give us immediate response on how students are doing. The state tests never did that. We got the responses into the next school year, which we no longer had the students. So anything that we're doing in terms of testing should be something directly connected to the classroom, what I'm instructing, to drive my instruction, so that students can be remediated, advanced, progressed on, and done in chunks. That's not something that's high stakes for kids.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I understand that, but with, like, my daughter's in 4th grade, and this teaching the algorithms rather than the answer, we all learn differently. And there's no specific way. So I think it's great you teach 4 different ways, but for a student to get a whole section of their math wrong because they didn't follow the process, but they got the right answer, but they did it the old-fashioned way because that was the easiest, that I think is completely wrong. And I think that is dumbing everybody and putting them and pigeonholing them into one specific thing. And I think that if this Common Core, if it can do one thing that I've seen on the language arts, it has created more critical thinking, it has created more reasoning why, but the process of the testing, or not the testing, but that they have to learn all 4 methods and they get it wrong, they get a whole section wrong. I mean, my daughter came home, she's been a straight A student, comes home and she got a D on her test because she could not understand this one way, but she understood the 3 previous. So how is that? I mean, it's like you're not... The answer is right. Math is black and white. There's no gray area in math. But the Common Core is teaching it that, we can maybe sort of have a gray area. So, thank you.
Dr. Evers?
I definitely agree with the previous questioner's comment on multiple strategies and how counterproductive and confusing they are and how frustrating they are for students. So I wanted to address your questions, had so many things packed in it. So the first thing is, where does this phrase "race to the top" that you hear about come from? So this is a phrase that comes, it's the signature education reform effort of the Obama administration. So they took the stimulus money and they poured most of it into sort of the existing channels, but they used some of it to pay for the national tests and to have this competitive grant program that brought people into the Common Core academic content standards. Now, why did they call it Race to the Top? Because there's a certain kind of social engineering mentality that believes that if the federal government doesn't coordinate things, the states and the school districts will all be going to the bottom. They will all naturally try to do the easiest thing. They won't care about academic excellence. They'll do the lowest thing that they can do. And only the wise people in the federal government can do this. So instead of this race to the bottom, they're going to have a federally guided, cartel of the states guided race to the top. That's where the phrase comes. It doesn't actually have something to do with international competition. Now, what about, though, international things? The states, the countries that are worse than the United States in international tests have national curriculum and national standards and national tests. But the states that are, countries that are better and worse do. So it's just that the United States is an exceptional country. We have a very decentralized, liberty-oriented way of doing things. And this Common Core subtracts from that aspect of that's integral to our tradition and the way the United States is. It homogenizes. It's often said in France that in Lyon, in Marseille, in Paris, in Lille, in Tours, all the kids are on the same page at the same hour. Okay, that's obviously an exaggeration for France. But the tendency of this Common Core is to drive toward that exact goal, uniformity. That is the desire of the proponents of this Common Core. They hate the patchwork, the fragmentation. Mike Smith, who originated systemic reform and was the top counselor to Arne Duncan and was a proponent of national standards back in the Clinton administration, he railed about our constitutional system and how it fragments educational policy and how that has to be done away with through national standards. That was in his original famous paper on systemic reform. So this is an ideology that these people have. One size fits all, cookie cutter national uniformity. That's what they believe in, and whatever it takes, they're going to try and do it. I do want to say something also, and that is that one of the reasons we have testing is that parents can be fooled. They think, we have a tendency to think our own kid is doing better than maybe our own kid is, objectively speaking. And suddenly that kid gets to college and has to take remedial courses. Well, why was my child getting an A or a B plus in high school and now he or she is taking a remediation? This is a serious problem. We also have tendencies, some of our tests kind of disguising pockets of problems. So maybe some language group or something like that is not succeeding, and we can find that out. We can have accountability tests that show where the problems are so that they can be addressed. So it's wrong to put down testing if it's well used and it's well designed, thoughtful, good tests. But anything can be misused. That's why we have to be careful and vigilant. And your district has an excellent reputation. I just want to say that I knew when I knew David Gordon when he was here. I knew when he was a county superintendent. I think he's maybe retired now.
He's county.
He's still county. Okay. Well, anyway, I haven't had interaction with him recently, but I did when I was working on the standards in 2010 because we met a lot at the county office. So I do think, though, that this is a wrong. It's a dead end for the United States, for California, and for your own school district. This is a step downward. These standards are not as good. California standards were ranked best in the country, and we've retrogressed. It's just so obvious when we're not doing algebra, expecting Algebra 1 in 8th grade anymore. We're doing it in 9th grade. That's when it's going to be tested, 9th grade.
Okay, Dr. Evers. Dr. Ladd?
Just a couple of points I would like to add to the conversation. There's so much in this conversation that it is something that intrigues me, because we move from a standard to a curriculum framework to an international standard to a comparison of the U.S. against international countries, and then we jump back and forth and we loop back and forth and we make it sound as though that it's a coherent conversation. And quite frankly, it confuses me. When I just thought, and I do believe I heard it right, and if not, Dr. Evers, my apologies, that when you take a look at, and there are two areas that you may wish to kind of consider, TIMS. It's called Trends in Math and Science Study. It's been going on since 1995, comparing international metrics of student performance in identified countries, and PISA, which is the Program for International Student Assessment. And that's the one that is more well-known. And what I thought I heard Dr. Evers say, and if I'm stating it correctly, that there are countries that have nationalized curriculum where the government says you're going to be on day one, page one, and that's what you're going to teach in countries where students are performing less well than the United States.
And in countries that are performing better.
And but then you have national curriculums in countries that are performing well ahead of our state in the United States, both. So the question then becomes, is it national curriculum or is it something else? And I'm going to argue that it isn't that simple. That it's not a national curriculum that is going to be the singular point of determining how students are performing. It is the genuine great work that's done in the classrooms that's really going to help set us apart as a country, that's going to lead us where we want to go for the 21st century. Now, someone asked, do we have a global economy or a global citizenry? No, we don't have a global citizenry, but we have a global economy. So Tony Wagner, in his recent work, Closing the Global Achievement Gap, he said there's 7 essential skills, and I'll just name a couple of them: critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration across networks, and leading by influence. So when we think about Common Core, another statement was made, it's going to homogenize everybody. We're going to be on day one, page one. Well, let me take us just a small walk down history lane. When we began looking at research-based curriculum, it was decided that if the states, individual states, were going to spend money for curriculum materials, they would like a return on investment. And I think we would accept that. So when they started looking at the kinds of materials, they came up with the notion that they had to be research-based. And the reason they had to be research-based was that the number of new teachers, I'll point down to a big school district without naming it, way down south, was employing multitudes of brand new teachers. Now, anyone that's joining a profession, whether you're a cobbler, an electrician, a college professor, a school superintendent, you're not going to walk in that job day one and be perfect. You're going to grow every single day if you're really, really working in your craft. You're going to get better. You're going to learn, right? And the individuals that started looking at this said, you know what, we need to have a curriculum that everybody can pick up and use absolutely green right out the door, first-year teacher. And you need to be on day one, page one, so that at the end of a given year, we can guarantee there's going to be successful student academic achievement. That was taking place long before we get to Common Core. So at the end of the day, I believe that a gentleman earlier had talked about having the opportunity for discussions like this. I think they're healthy. I think it is a cornerstone of democracy. Having well-educated citizens, having people that are going to respect the differences of opinion is what comes out of a strong educational system. I don't agree with certain statements that were made, but I have every confidence that if we continue to work forward through the Common Core, I am pro-Common Core, we're going to get better. We're going to find out what parts don't work, like we did with any set of standards. But I want the same set of standards for the kids in Alabama as they are in California.
Dr. Ladd, could you wrap it up, or I'll have that as your closing statement?
I'll take that as my closing statement.
All right, great. Thank you. I have 2 questions over here, and let's move on.
Okay. My name is Sean Salvetta. I just moved here from Santa Clara County. My daughter went to K through 8th private school, took Algebra 1 in 8th grade, did great. She is now in geometry.
So what school did you go to?
She went to St. Mary's School in Gilroy. Fantastic fantastic school, fantastic teachers, very dedicated staff all the way around. Therefore, when I was moving, I researched school districts. I could have gone anywhere in the Sacramento area. I chose this school district, and Elk Grove High School in particular. One of the big factors was the FFA department, which my daughter's highly involved in. You know, I've been hearing that this isn't political, but it is. As soon as the government, especially the feds, get involved in my business, it becomes political. I will bring something up that nobody has bothered to touch on, and I hope that somebody on this panel can address, and that is, how does data mining of my child or children help in their education? Who does that bring an advantage to? Because it is not my child or my children. I have a teenager and I have a toddler. My teenager is very focused. She knows where she's going, what she's going to do. I'm sure that she can find her way through these last 4 years and muddle through this, whatever gets implemented. My toddler, on the other hand, I have serious doubts about. I do not like this being shoved down my throat. I don't care if it's by the federal government, by the state government. If I don't agree with it, I will argue.
Okay, your question, please.
Data mining.
Okay.
Who does it who does it help?
Okay, who would like to take that? Dr. Evers?
So there's a lot to say about data collection and data utilization. Obviously, you know, teachers have always kept grade books. This is not completely something new. But what's happened with the growth of high-speed computers and ability to talk back and forth between computers and various ideas that people have about how they can transform society, people collect and use data in ways that were not easily imaginable a few years ago. We all have read in recent times about the National Security Agency, the NSA, monitoring all these phone calls and computer interactions and so forth. And we all have been a little worried about whether the Internal Revenue Service, which also has a lot of our data, might be bent in political ways at times under different administrations. So this is a concern that everybody has recently. So we had in place since the 1970s something called FERPA, which is a family privacy law, and it's supposed to protect student privacy. And it had a quite strict interpretation until the Obama administration. And so I'm very familiar with this law because the office that governs student privacy was under me when I was an Assistant Secretary of Education in the federal government. And the Obama administration way loosened this. So it used to be that it had to be used for pretty narrowly educational purposes. We used to get besieged by people in labor agencies, agricultural agencies, health agencies. These are government agencies, and sometimes vendors that wanted to have access to this data and play with it and so forth. It's supposed to be de-individualized, but the more good we've gotten at computers, you can kind of reconstruct possibly who the person is if you have enough information about them. And then there is a template that has, it's a standardized template that has 400 things in it. You don't have to, districts don't have to use 400, they could use a lot less, but there it is. There it is, and it has to be shared back and forth by requirements of the federal government. It has to be in the same template to get, you know, for longitudinal data systems and so forth. All right, so the point is, the current administration has way relaxed these things. It can be a health agency, it can be a labor planning and so forth. And it can be things like InBloom that prepares student data and massages it for vendors and so forth. Now,
can you answer that a little quicker? We're already 2 minutes
I'm on
into
my
it.
last sentence.
All right.
So the philosophical basis of this is in part that some of the people involved in education and influential, like Mark Tucker and others, want to have labor planning, workforce planning, economic planning be integrated with education results. And so they're trying to plan and help organize the workforce of the future. And that has been why they've overthrown the previous barriers or smokestacks or whatever that existed in data collection, and have integrated everything and made these national data pools and collections.
Thank you very much. Next question, ma'am.
Yeah, hi, I'm Pat Clark, and I'm a homeschool mom in Elk Grove. And my concern was the same type of information, but I wanted to know, could anybody here actually tell me what exactly with this Common Core is required information that they need on my children? Whatever, DNA, whatever, what do they require? What will they require? And if I choose not to, what does that mean?
Okay. Who would like to tackle? Yes, sir.
I can respond to that briefly. The California Longitudinal Pupil Achievement Data System, CalPADS, is what we use, or what's the state has, and so we submit data from our schools to the state, and the state, in fact, is required to submit data to the federal government. I can't give you a specific list in terms, but do we provide individual student data? We do, not with names. We provide it with student identification numbers. Dr. Evers, who noted that with increased technological information, we have the capability of providing it, but it's state achievement data. It's the free and reduced data, it's attendance data, it's discipline data, it's the standard data that we're submitting to the state, have submitted to the state, and under the Common Core there's been no shift in that.
So there is no actual requirements that you need blood type or DNA or
None.
any of that other stuff?
None whatsoever.
No shift in it yet.
And as a teacher, we would fight that 100%.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to go into closing statements at this point in time. I don't have anyone else ready to speak, questions rather. So I will now go to, I'm sorry, I didn't see all you folks back there. Okay, we're going to keep this down to, and I'm going to be really tough now, okay? Not to you, but to our panelists.
Okay.
It's going to be one panelist to answer the question.
So well, first of all, thank you very much. I know everybody said that, but I'm glad we're all able to come here tonight. So my question does refer more to the CalPADS and being able to opt out. I work in a very high-tech field, and I know how important data is, both to be sold, kept, tracked, everything. And if you have children who, it was referred to earlier, to make good employers, good employees, basically good workers, which we all need, do we as parents have the ability to opt out of that under the privacy for our children? And that's more of a local question. I mean, we can get into federal and everything, but locally in Elk Grove, will parents have the ability to opt out?
Okay,
Thank you again.
Who would like to answer that? You have 1 minute.
You can opt out of taking the test, but whatever data is collected, say your child got in some incident, did a senior prank or something like that, or something worse or something less than a senior prank, that goes in what they call in school your permanent record, and it's permanent.
And that is correct.
I said one panelist per question, please.
Can we hear from the school district?
Sure. Go ahead. They want to hear it. I'm here for you. One minute, though, please.
I'll take less than a minute. I was going to concur. That is correct. And what I would just encourage, and I'll be very brief because I'll add this to the closing statement, is we're more than happy to sit down with any individual, and we can literally give you the exact listing of the data that we're required to submit to the state, so you can see exactly the types of data on your children that we are submitting to the state.
Okay.
Where can we get
Thank
that?
you.
Why not make it public?
Yeah, put it online.
We can certainly provide information and list that in terms of the specific data points that were required by the state to submit. We could certainly provide that information.
Okay, good.
Sure.
Next question.
I'll be brief. I usually don't speak, but I am not against standards or curriculum. I've investigated the curriculum. It's fine with me, and I can see some benefit to standards across states, and but the part that concerns, also, I must say, I investigated something about this Common Core, and I noticed online that that schools have their funds withdrawn if they don't participate in Common Core, and I'd like someone to tell me if that's true. And second of all, I've been listening to the news a lot, and I heard it mentioned that the Common Core has a lot of socialist ideas embedded in it. And most alarming to me was that it mentioned for young kids, maybe 4th grade, you must obey your president. And that is contrary to the Constitution. And they also mentioned that the Constitution was not being taught. And just homeschooling my daughter from a former communist country, that's a very important concept to her. That was very difficult to get across to her.
Okay, and your question?
And teaching the Constitution, that opened her individual rights to her, and it appalls me that that we're even discussing something like this in this country.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Dr. Evers?
And I'll sit down and I'll let you.
Okay.
So you had a lot to say, and I'm forgetting some of it, but one of your most important questions was, so these standards are mostly about math and English. So some things that have to do with history and social science are not really in them. And so I will tell you, though, that the quotes that you had there about always obeying your government and the president looks out for everybody and so forth, this is from a Pearson workbook in literature, and there are these indoctrination type questions that are in there. And there's another one where they have the children write persuasive essays, and they're supposed to trick their parents by using emotional language and saying things like, they instead of making rational arguments, they're supposed to enlist the emotions of the parents, so they're supposed to use words like, you don't want us to have any fun, do you? And you would hate it if we enjoyed ourselves at recess. And so you're supposed to write letters to your parents in order to get money for the school district to buy gym equipment, outdoor jungle gym equipment. So there is some political stuff that's gotten into these lesson plans. But what can you, there was a question just before that.
The funds removed.
Oh, I think someone else should answer that. The thing in California is every state is a little different. In California, you actually don't, your district does not actually have to technically follow any standards, but they have to give the test. And the test is based on the standards. And the judging of the schools is based on the standards. So the districts, of course, follow the standards. Now, I will say that's sort of the mechanism in California.
Thank you. Ms. Mercer, you have the response for the funding?
I'm guessing it's probably a state that signed up for one of those Race to the Top grants, which we have not and we will not. And so it wouldn't be an issue for us. Some of those states are facing difficulties in trying to implement various parts of it, including the testing and the rest. That's not a position that California is in, and that's not a position that your district would be in, I think is how I would describe it. Also, another mechanism that they have for enforcing the standards is the textbook adoptions.
Right.
Since the state will go over and pay for a percentage of it if you adopt their approved materials.
Okay, thank you very much.
And you have to certify, above 8th grade, you have to certify that they meet the standards.
Okay. Your question, ma'am?
Yes, Lavinia, and my kids were in the Unified School District, Elk Grove. My question to you, Ms. Maggie Ellis, you say that you look and you scrutinize, before you decide what books you bring into your classroom. Is that correct? How long did California look at these Common Core state standards and scrutinize and decide and debate whether or not they are higher or lower than these standards that we already had?
That would be a question I would say that you should go to the State Board of Education and ask.
Okay.
Well, I can answer it because I was on the Standards Commission at the
Right.
time. It was 6 weeks. 6
Okay,
weeks.
hold on. And then my second question is, bringing it back to the kids. Now, we are talking about kids. Where does creativity fit into Common Core state standards? Where does it fit? All I hear is language arts, mathematics, left and right, 3 hours of math, 3 hours of language in elementary school. My kids come home, there's no fun. They can't go outside and play because they're doing the lattice method, right? Now, Harrison Ford, Tiger Woods, and our favorite, Bill Gates, were all college dropouts. They got there because their creativity took them there, not the lattice method, not tests, and not standards. Where does creativity fit into our kids' lives?
I think if you ask every teacher, it fits every day. The implementation of Common Core and tying creativity to that's been a challenge that we've struggled with adoptions prior to Common Core. When we look at the reference to some of our curriculum that we've had, that Dr. Ladd referenced in terms of having textbooks and curriculum that teachers from day one could, basically it was scripted. We call them scripted curriculum. In this district, we fought against that. We did not do day one. We taught as a professional. We knew what our kids needed. That when you have scripted materials, you lose creativity.
And that's okay.
No, it is not. And I think every teacher that Alice and I both serve on CTA State Council, we have always fought against curriculum that's scripted. We've also always fought against the loss of arts and music and creativity in classrooms. We've fought against standardized tests that in some areas, in some districts not as fortunate as we are, have lost that creativity because they have been pushed to script how they're learning from classroom to classroom to make improvements on a test. In this district, we have always fought against that because we know the creativity is what leads this country to be great, what creates the Bill Gates. What creates the future workforce is the creativity for the jobs that we don't even know exist in the future. That comes from student creativity. As a teacher, I am never going to stifle that. I want them to be creative. And if I see parts of my curriculum that are stifling that, I'm going to adjust that curriculum. The curriculum that we're given is not for me to follow step by step necessarily. I look at it, I evaluate it, I massage it, I supplement with it. I bring, if we're talking about language arts and history, I bring in incredible novels that teach historical fiction. We're not going to lose that creativity just because of Common Core. But it is something that as teachers, we fight against the stifling of creativity all the time from publishers or from mandates from the state or the federal government. But as a teacher at heart, we will figure out ways to keep creativity.
Did you say you can choose your own textbooks?
No, I don't choose my own textbooks, but I can supplement my curriculum.
Is there a percentage?
Could you come to the microphone, please, and state your name?
There's not a percentage, and as a teacher, we really evaluate what is a good supplemental material that's not going to necessarily just be busy work. We want it to have value. But as we look at adoptions, no adoption has ever been perfect. There's been lots of gaps through every adoption that we've had in this state. And as a teacher, it's our responsibility to make sure when we see those gaps, we find the materials that we know are going to strengthen student skills and move them forward.
But you have to teach from the textbooks also.
I'm sorry.
I do use the textbooks, yes.
I have to go to the next questions. If you have a question, please get in line and sign up. Thank you.
I'll just amen, Jackie.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Jeff. I have one boy that just started freshman in Elk Grove, and my question is the way things are turning with, call it government, we all know it is, okay? They're taking things out like 9/11. They don't teach anything today about what happened 9/11. However, they are teaching now the 5 pillars of Islam. Okay? Why? Who built this? Okay? This is America. Today we have kids developing and getting paid millions and millions of dollars for developing programs. Okay? Today. So if they're doing that today, why change something that's not broke? It's okay if you have tweaks here and there, but oh geez, this is huge. So, and my last question is, pardon me, do either one of you two gentlemen have kids in school that are going to be going through this?
No, I don't.
Thank you.
Another question? I mean, I'm here all night.
Hi, my name is Heather Delfs, and I have a child in elementary, middle school, and high school in Elk Grove Unified. And I have to leave, and I think probably, I noticed a lot of people are leaving. And it was supposed to be 7 to 9, but I know how these things go. I hate to leave because it's so important. But so my question is, what's the plan after this? Because there's still lots of questions and lots of things to talk about. So will there be a follow-up, or what's the plan?
Okay, that would be the... You're on, Laura.
I'll answer that. We're here for you. If you are interested in doing something like this again, we can totally move in that direction. You can like us on Facebook. You can ask us questions. You can say, hey, I was at that. You can fill out the little form, the little quarter sheet, and leave it here and say, I want to do another one. I would also encourage you to go to your school board meetings and vocalize your concerns, not just here, but to your school board. We do need to wrap up, so I'm going to cut off the questions. I'm so sorry. If we did not get to your questions, just one more? Okay, last question.
Weren't you up here before? No? Oh, okay.
There. Thank you. Thank you,
she was
Laura.
the other
Thank you.
purple blouse. Okay.
My name is Catherine. Thank you all for coming, really. 45 states, out of the 45 states that have adopted the Common Core, 26 of them have decided to reconsider and withdraw. I have a question for Mr. Cerruti. Ms. Weinzinger, I get that right? Weinzinger mentioned that the New York teachers are so outraged about this that they're ready to riot. But you stated that that's not going to happen in Elk Grove. So my question would be, what's different here in Elk Grove? If it's Common Core state standards and the state standards are the same in all the states that have adopted the standards, how is Elk Grove exempt from that?
In any significant change initiative, there's typically 3 basic questions to ask, and typically they're asked in the following order: what, how, and why. What is it, how are you going to do it, and then why? And it's the wrong order. And that's actually why that we have divergent opinions. It needs to start with why, and then how are you going to do it, and what is it? And we started 4 years ago in Elk Grove. And the standards actually, the conversations at the national level began in 2008, actually under the Bush administration. Some of the conversations began. And California and Elk Grove, we had our eyes on it, and we have folks in the audience who sat with Dr. Evers at some of the meetings that were there, and we have our folks who have been directly involved in early conversations, and we're working directly with our teachers, with our program specialists, with our coaches. We're working with our board. We certainly aren't exempt from making mistakes in the implementation, and I've heard things and jotted information down because information is key and critical in terms of the information and communication we're having. But I feel very, very confident in the standards being an advancement in education. Are they perfect? No. But is it a move in the right direction? It is. And we're very, very thoughtful in our implementation. We've got a long-term implementation plan. We've got a curriculum adoption plan that goes out to the year 2020. And so we've been very thoughtful in our design and very careful in our implementation. And we're working directly with our teachers and classified staff in the classroom under the leadership of our school board and superintendent. And I just feel if you're asking why New York and not us, because we're better than they are.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go into closing.
Them's was fighting words with New Yorkers, I can tell you that right now.
All right. We're going to go into closing statements at this point in time, and the boss just spoke. It's 2 minutes per closing statement, and you'll hear the bell ring at that time, mine and hers. We have our timers on. So we will now start with Dr. Evers, and then we'll move on down.
So one of the questions is why? And the reason is that certain kinds of social engineering, social planner types think that without people like them being in charge at the center, the kinds of outcomes, the kinds of procedures, the kinds of efforts that they would like to see happen just won't happen. And so they don't like federalism, they don't like fragmentation, and they also, some of the governors don't like competition. So the lead governor in pushing the National Governors Association into the Common Core effort, it started really in 2006. So the Governors Association didn't really come on until a couple of years later. Was Sonny Perdue of Georgia, and he always used to go around complaining that other states with other standards and other tests than Georgia kept getting compared to Georgia. And he wanted to end that, and he wanted to stifle competition, and he wanted a cartel of the states, and he pushed for the Governors Association to facilitate that. They have historically done that. The Governors Association did that with the internet sales tax. This is one of their habits, to stifle competition by forming a cartel of the states, and they did that in curriculum. Now, I do agree with a number of the people on the panel and in the audience that teacher quality is the most important thing, and educational leadership comes up right close to it. But standards are also really important because they govern what goes on in the classroom. They are the framework for the curriculum, what's delivered, what the lesson plans are. And if you have uniformity and a national monopoly, you're not going to get variety. You're not going to really be the kind of country we've been in the past. And I really want to leave a lot of what's great in America to my children and grandchildren. If you look across the world, there are two countries that are
Please wrap up.
that are similar to the United States in culture, Australia and Canada. They have less central control. They have no federal Ministry of Education. They have no National Office of Education. And yet they, since the 1970s, have been getting better and better, and now they're advanced countries. And the United States, which is increasingly centralized, is plugging along at mediocre. I want to close by quoting William McCollum, he was a math professor who helped write the math standards. And here's what he said to the Council of Mathematical Professional Associations. The overall math standards are not high, certainly not in comparison with other nations, including East Asia, where math education excels. We can do better than the Common Core.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Ellis.
2 minutes, right?
Yes, ma'am. Please, 2 minutes.
You know, as I know I came across very passionately because my students are my kids. They're just not my students. They're my children. You are their first teachers, and you will always be their teachers. And I fully believe in a partnership with teachers on your campus that your child will get the best education and become a very well-rounded citizen with your guidance and our expertise. I would ask that you really engage with your teachers, with your principals, with your PTAs. And when you see that there's information that you need, seek it from them. Ask those questions. They aren't going to always know the answers right now because we are still learning, but we'll find it. Or we'll find somebody in the district office who can help you find those answers. There is no secret. There's transparency in this district. We're not trying to hide anything that we're doing. And a lot of the conversation that I heard here tonight has brought some light to my knowledge, and I think we do have some work to do with our teachers in communicating and making sure that the message that we're giving parents is more clear. Understanding that we always have your child's best interests at heart. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Winzinger?
I would just like to say that, in my opinion, that the educational crisis in this country is actually a fabricated one. I think we've had a great education system in this country, and I feel like I'm a product of that. And I think it is manufactured by those who are in the need of power and money, that there's a lot of collaboration going on between politicians and big businesses, and they want you to believe that they know better than you do how to raise our children and how to teach them. And in my opinion, that is totally an opposite notion that we should have in this country. You are their parents. You are their first and only expert for them. Everybody else is supplemental. Teachers, district personnel, everybody is supplemental. Parents are the first. And I want you all to know that you need to empower yourself to engage with your school boards, with your superintendent, with your teachers, and with all of those around you. And don't let anybody try to tell you that you're crazy if you're concerned about this, because it is concerning, because it is your children. And so I want you to stand up, and I want you to take charge of that right that you have to educate and to be the parent of your own children. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Dr. Ladd?
You asked me to make my
No, you can speak. No.
a while back, so I'll stick to what I do. I say what I do, and I stick with it. You asked me to, and I did.
Oh.
I'll try and make this short because I've got to get back to Natomas and get up for class at 8 in the morning. Politics has been involved over in this area going way back to the Clintons with Reading First and on over into the second Bush administration. You were perhaps not aware of it because you were not aware of scripted curriculum being used over on your students. It was not being used on your students apparently over in Elk Grove. It was used in other places, and in the district I teach in Sac City Unified, there were principals who would go from room to room expecting teachers to be at the same point over in their script for that particular curriculum. This is somewhere we've been in the past. I think it's part of why there is a lot more creative teaching that's being done in California, and specifically over in districts like my own, with the implementation of Common Core. My fear is that the standardized testing is what will endanger it. The difference between us and New York is that they have their test out. So this is the thought that I will leave you with. We have a testing moratorium, but they will be doing field testing. They will not be going over and having individual scores, but looking at it to see what the test results say. How will it be used? I think it's very important that we judge the test and the standards if there are score drops, rather than the students and the schools and the teachers. That's what we need to look out for. We cannot assume that the standards are right. We certainly can't assume these new assessments are correct. Standards and testing are a really lousy way to go over and trying to implement change. Instructional strategies, which I've talked about a bit here, and Ms. Ellis has talked about, that's the way to go over and change things. It does require some standards, but to the degree we've been doing teaching in standards, it's been too much. We need to get off that track.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cerruti?
Thank you. I would make a suggestion. Great conversation this evening, and my suggestion is this, and that is questions that folks have regarding the Common Core, regarding assessment, regarding professional development, regarding curriculum, they live with me. You can contact me directly, and I encourage you to do that. And if you come to the board and you have a question, oftentimes I'm the one who goes out in the hallway and gives you my card, and we have conversations, and that's exactly what I do. And I'm not the one that's going to have all the answers, but I've got incredible experts both in the field and at the district office who will provide you information, and that is the key. When we've had our parent communication and our parent information evenings at school sites, and I referenced this at the outset, we've had parents who are adamant about their concerns about the Common Core. And I can assure you that we don't necessarily answer every question, but our questions are related to what's happening with their kids in their classrooms. And the feedback that we get, literally to a person, is I came here wondering what this is all about, and I'm leaving saying I wish I had been taught this way. And so I encourage you, my words right here may not sway a perspective, but talk to your teachers, talk to principals. We're new into this. It's a step in the right direction. I firmly believe this is an evolution, a natural evolution that is enhancing instruction and curriculum. But talk to us. We'll meet with you individually. We'll meet with you in groups. It's our responsibility to inform you. And the only way we will be successful with the Common Core is a collaboration within our district and our community. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, that concludes our core panel tonight. But she was early. There's just a couple of things I like to say. Number one, I heard a lot of answers and a lot of questions, and I came, just like the rest of you, I wanted to learn a little bit more about this Common Core. And I'm leaving with, I'll be honest, those that know me, that's what I say, and I mean it. I'm leaving with some questions, and I hope that you are going to continue this. Please fill out those forms so you can have another discussion like this, and then come prepared with your questions. I mean, don't wait till you get so angry that you forget what you want to ask. And every question that you have is so important. That's the only way that a panel will be able to answer your questions. After your question, then you get a response. But sometimes it's not enough. You need a little bit more one-on-one. And by that I mean, go to your school board meetings, which, by the way, is next Tuesday at 7 o'clock at the Robert Trigg Center, November the 19th.
Oh, I knew Robert Trigg, too.
I'm not going to ask how old you are. But anyway, the other thing is, it's like, talk to your teachers. I mean, if your child is being bullied, what do you do? You don't just sit home and think about it and say, well, I guess I'm going to go. No, you go and you talk to the teacher. So that's what I'm saying. Start with the teacher. If that doesn't answer your question, it's escalate it. Go to the top. There's Dr. Ladd is there. And if he can't answer the question, he'll call some experts until you get your question answered. You have to wait and get your question answered. Don't walk away from it. If you leave tonight and say, I didn't get my questions answered, it's your fault. It's my fault, and it's the panel's fault, because we didn't dig deep enough into it. And I think that's what we need to do when we have another forum. And I am so privileged that I was asked to be here this evening, because it opened my eyes. And like I said, I have great-grandchildren in the school system here now, and I've got to know what this is all about. So I can explain to my granddaughter, you know, your kids are doing this and this, but I'm going to be asking questions, because I don't understand it myself. And let's see what else. I didn't bring any boxing gloves. I thought I might need them, but I tell you what, you were all, and I want to thank you so much. You were so respectful to each other. There are times that, you know, passion kind of ekes out a little bit, but you guys were very, very respectful to your peers, to the audience, and to the panels. I really, really appreciate it. It made my job super easy. And again, I thank you very, very much, and God bless you. And please drive carefully this evening.
Yeah.